In fact, we're 1 minute past. So welcome everyone to this live session as part of the Quilt and Learn January 2025 event. We have a wonderful panel here with us today, and we are all gathered to talk about technology in quilting. So first of all, I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves. So the order I have you in on my screen is Liz, Laurie, Ali, Tracy, Tony. So Liz, go for it.
Oh, great. I live in Canada, but obviously you're not hearing a Canadian accent because I lived in South Africa and Namibia in Africa for many years before we immigrated to Canada. I love quilting. I also love lingerie sewing and garment sewing. So I have 3 stashes.
Wonderful. And you were sharing about the lingerie sewing last night on the Sew and Talk channel. So that was awesome. Thank you so much. Laurie, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm Lori. I'm located in Colorado. As I mentioned earlier, I was in the Denver area for over 20 years, and right before Christmas, we moved to the mountains to Grand Lake, Colorado. So definitely have a lot more snow and cold. But
Amazing.
yeah, so I currently am focusing on 3 things. I'm a long arm quilter. I've had a long arm quilting business where I've worked with customers for 4 years. I also teach and design. My latest passion is the class that I shared with Quilt and Learn with the topography and the lettering. And then I served in nonprofits for 20 years. And so I also served as the executive director of the Quilts of Valor Foundation here in the US from 21 to 23. And I also work with guilds and groups on volunteer management, strategic planning, and just kind of how to have fun and quilt together. So.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you very much. Ali, over to you.
Hi, I'm Ali Ride. I am Australian originally, but I live just outside Verona in northern Italy. I am a recovering engineer. I used to work offshore on oil rigs in Indonesia, Australia, a few other places around the world. So that was a pretty good time. And obviously, being an engineer, I know a lot of people who are quilters have this kind of crossover of brains between creative and analytical. And I think that this discussion tonight is going to bring out some of those amazing kind of crossovers as well. It's kind of about how I got into quilting. When I had my first baby, I wanted to make a baby quilt. I was also given a baby quilt from a mum of one of my friends, and that kind of kickstarted my whole creative business, which I run now. And I teach quilters, service designers how to design, write, and sell unique quilt patterns so that they can start their own creative businesses as well.
Yeah, I think that that's a perfect example of technology in action because you use software to create the patterns. There's then like a website-y marketing element to it as well, which needs more software. Then people have got to make the patterns with some sort of sewing machine and then quilt them with some sort of machine or long arm or something. So yeah, the whole cycle is there in that. Tracy, over to you.
Hi, Tracy from warm South Australia, where I am at the beach. No snow in sight. In fact, I don't see snow ever.
And you don't look unhappy about that at all.
Not at all. Not at all. This is only day 2 here now. So I'm here for the next 3 weeks. I have been designing and publishing patterns in magazines now since 1998. And I got my first long arm in 2000, so 25 years now. My first computer system was 2006. So I got the first IntelliQuilter computer system in the world off the production line on my machine. And I have to say, it's actually still going.
Okay, that's interesting.
It's slow and I worry every time, but I've never had a computer last that long. So I'm very, very proud of that fact that it is such a robust system that it can pretty much. Not going to guarantee it will always happen. So I've also been the Australian dealer for A1 Long Arms and IntelliQuilter system since 2005 and 6, and therefore installed on all brands, every brand of long arm machine, plus a few that some of the Americans probably have never heard of that are only here in Australia. Travel all over Australia, have taught in America since 2005, and around the place at different shows, machine quilting shows, and also ran our own international machine quilting show here in Australia for 10 years, which I sold just before COVID hit, which was big relief
Good
for me.
timing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
I pivoted to obviously online. So I've actually been 5 years now, 5 years this month since I first did my first webinar in a summit that I had set up, but it was more of an ongoing thing. And that was just the software that I had. So now it's more a membership thing. So 5 years, every month I am presenting something to learn on computer quilting, whether it's specific to the IntelliQuilter or it's generic to any brand computer system on a long arm machine. So
Fascinating.
that's my thing. So this topic was just perfect for me because a
Absolutely.
lot of the classes that I've presented are for creating things that you wouldn't normally expect to create on a long arm or with a computer system.
All right, thank you. And over to you, Tony.
I am Tony. I am Just BT Studios. I am just trying to get my business up and going, but I have been in the industry for about 18 years. I've owned 2 quilt shops. I currently work at a quilt shop. I also do a lot of marketing for quilt businesses. But my love is teaching. I love to teach. When I had my business during COVID, I had to go virtual, so I had to learn to teach virtually. So I host a lot of mystery quilts, and this year my goal is to actually build my pattern base so I can start selling and reselling some of my patterns. So I'm going to talk about EQ8. Let's walk right into that.
Right, and I mentioned just before we started, and I will remember to introduce myself this time, which I almost always forget. But I'm Bee Byrne. I'm the host of Quilt and Learn. But I just bought EQ8 during the Thanksgiving sales, and haven't got any further than installing it. I installed it and then stalled. So I'm very interested to hear what's in EQ8 now. Just out of interest, because I suppose one of the first tools that comes to mind when you think about technology and quilting, and it's been mentioned a couple of times, but out of interest, how many of you have long arm machines? I think is it just Laurie and Tracy, I guess? Yes, right. Because I suppose, I mean, the sewing machine itself is technological, and I know that people are kind of wedded to their own brands. Although to be honest, I always forget which brand my machine is. I think it's a Janome, but I will frequently get that wrong. Do each of you have a kind of favorite machine brand that you like to go with for your domestic machine or your long arm? Laurie, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, I have an Innova, and I love it. I've quilted on it for over 4 years. I specifically picked it because I wanted a machine that was heavy duty that would run a long time because I did want to set it up as a business. And in my particular region, I get good service. With other brands, I didn't necessarily get good service. But I think long arms and sewing machines are like cars. You just kind of have to figure out which one meets your needs the best, and that's what's worked for me.
Absolutely, yes. It can take a lot of trial and error. Ali, what about you?
I got my first sewing machine when I turned 30, and my family was extremely surprised that I asked them for a sewing machine as a present because I was definitely not into sewing or anything like that. I was, wearing my coveralls and hard hat and boots offshore and things. But then I went back to study design and I started to do some sewing. My mum's always sewed. She's had an Elna since 1973. Probably some of you have that model as well. I recently just upgraded it for her to a Bernina because I tried to sew a quilt on it when I was back in Australia, and it was like the worst sewing I've ever done in my life on her machine. I'm like, Mum, we have to get you a new machine, and now she loves it. I've got a Bernina, she's got a Bernina. For now, we're kind of the Bernina family, plus my brother-in-law lives in Switzerland, so when we go to Switzerland to visit them, it's a great excuse to go to the Bernina shop and check out all the cool stuff. But
yeah, I can imagine.
Like Laurie mentioned, just when I was looking at machines at the beginning, it was just what was meeting my needs right then. And incidentally, I got a patchwork edition of Bernina when I wasn't even doing any quilting then. So it was kind of like fate. The universe was telling me something. Messages are coming through.
Yeah. And Tony, what about you?
I currently have a Janome M8. I got it mainly because of the big throat space, and it also has the It's got a stitch regulator built into it.
Mm.
So it's my third Janome I've had. So I do like Janomes, but I love Berninas. We also sell baby locks at the store I'm in. So I'm not too loyal. I
No,
like
no.
everything.
Yeah, I'm not
And
either.
Liz, what about you?
Well, I also am very aware of the fact that all of the brands, like I think it was Laurie that mentioned like cars, you know, it's the brand that you like. I used to be, before I retired, the national education manager for Janome and Elna in Canada. So most of my machines are Janomes. I have one Elna that is 48 years old. Hubby bought it as an engagement present so I could make my wedding dress and my bridesmaids' dresses, and it still works.
Wow.
And I don't have a long arm, but I have access to one. And I know how to use the software because, of course, I had to know things like that. And I do like walking foot quilting, but I have got some other things that I will share just now.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we'll get to those. Tracy, I've deliberately left you till last because you are the queen of long arm machine and quilting in Australia. So, and probably elsewhere as well. So, tell us about what machine. Well, do you have a domestic machine as well?
Multiple, yes.
Yes.
I also collect antique ones, so yeah, multiple,
Oh.
and I mean lots. Look, I started out, my first sewing machine was at 17 years old, and I sewed all my own clothes. So that was a really small little brother. And then I moved in up to a Janome, a memory craft, and I started free motion quilting on that machine, and I actually wore the needle bar out. I knew I could have got it fixed, and it wasn't that expensive, but I told hubby that I deserved a banana if I did that. So I got myself
Yes.
a 1260 Quilters edition, which I still use to this day. So, you know, that's, yeah, getting up there now. It's one of the last ones in Australia of the old mechanical ones. So I still use that. I've now got a 710 as well. Just so that I could demonstrate using rulers, because I also manufacture and sell rulers for machine quilting and have so for a very long time, 25 years. As far as the long arms are concerned, I've owned 4 machines. And so I have owned 2 different brands. Have been the A1 dealer since 2005. But that's because of when I first traveled to America, we visited the other long arm, my first one's factory, just to work out how I could get it to move so much easier, because it was harder to move. And we did a lot of modifications. Now, I'm a farmer's wife, and that means that we do all our own maintenance, all our own modifications. Nothing's ever right. Everything has to be modified on the farm. So we're not frightened to try and do those things, whereas a lot of people are nervous. And I ended up choosing a machine primarily for its movement, so that I could freehand a lot easier, and also for the ability to do all my own servicing and to be able to talk my clients through servicing and fixing their own machines. They are a very simple industrial machine. The electronics, I'm ignoring that. I'm talking about the mechanical side of a sewing machine. And if you are able, because, you know, let's face it, every time something breaks down, it's the middle of the night. You're not going to get service. And especially in Australia, there's only like one dealer, me, and for the whole of Australia, there is not a shop down the road. You're not going to, even with the more common brands here now, with the Handy Quilters and the Grace, Handy Quilter and Bonina would be the only ones where you could say there are shops or salespeople, hopefully service people. That's not a guarantee, you know, within a couple of 100 Ks of each other. But you're still going to be traveling. You're not going to get anyone to come to your home for any of these. So that's why I ended up choosing the A1 and still sell them, nowhere near as many. The industry hasn't, let's say, it's slowed down with the sales of machines because there are so many machines out there. The second-hand market is getting there, but you don't very often see an A1 out there. But because I've worked on all the brands, there are pros and cons to all of them, and exactly what was said
For sure.
earlier. You know, over here it was always, you know, comparing cars is, you know, a Holden seat might fit your butt a little bit better than a Ford seat. And that's really truly what it is. They've all got features and benefits, and you've got to work out which of those are more important for you as an individual. Some may be the ergonomics, some may be the freehand movement, some may be how heavy they are. For me, it was all about being able to service and the movement. I didn't worry about the stitch regulator. The A1's current stitch regulator is beautiful, as are all brands. And we must remember, every single company that produces these machines are always looking to improve, just like with computers, just like with cars. So no matter what you've got, hopefully that company will allow you to upgrade it without having to replace it entirely. Not all of them allow you to do that. And that is probably another feature I would look at when you're looking at different brands, on whether the companies make it easier for their clients to continue using their huge, big, massive machine without having to totally replace it.
Absolutely. And they can be massive. Someone was telling me, well, no, I don't know exactly. I won't even try and guess. How big do they go up to though?
31-inch throat and a 14-foot table is quite standard.
14 feet.
Cool. That's a standard size, special order, but standard size. Some you can get anything you want if you're prepared. Well, with A1, it's $350 extra US to purpose build your table to the size that you need. So I've had a few, you know, that are 11 foot to fit in a room. They can't fit a 12 or a 14. They've got an 11 or a 10 or whatever. Some of the other brands now, which are not big solid steel tables, you can buy them. So they're a 5 foot with a 2 foot extension. So you get 7, or it'd be a 10 foot with 2 5s together, plus a 2 foot extension makes it a 12. But they all come in pieces and you have to join them together. But those really solid industrial ones, like the Nova, the A1, the APQS, the Gamel, the Knolting, Prodigy, etc., are all solid tables. They're not connected together like Lego, like some of the others. And I call them the really solid true industrial long arm machines.
Fascinating. All right. So going from like huge mechanics to possibly smaller items, Ali, tell us how you use technology when you're quilting in your business.
Yeah, sure. So as a designer, you know, I like to start off analog. I've got a lot of notebooks and papers and all kinds of things. I like to start off there. I like to go sketching. I always take a sketchbook around with me, and I look at different pieces of what I can see around. I use a viewfinder a lot of times. It's a little square. You can cut it out of any paper just to capture some quick sketches and things like that. So I always start analog in my design process. But oftentimes trying to like take the inspiration that you see and move it away from that inspiration source, you want to iterate it. And oftentimes that's faster to do, and you can come up with some amazing designs doing that digitally. So I work in Adobe Illustrator. So I generally sketch analog, I come back with some ideas, or I've generated a few ideas, and then I will import those into Illustrator, or I'll recreate them digitally in Illustrator. And then I can really rapidly iterate those designs quickly, and I can recolor them, rotate them, flip them, propagate them and tessellate them in different kinds of ways. And so that's kind of how I use that tool digitally in my design process. And then, of course, developing that design from then on, I use it to calculate all of the fabric requirements that I need for the pattern, as well as, you know, create all the diagrams for the pattern. I also use Adobe InDesign, which is another one of their software tools, to do all of the layout for all of the quilt patterns that I create too. So that's about kind of creating that professional PDF document that then becomes the digital asset that you can use in your business as well. So that's kind of how I use technology. It's like software. I don't have a big machine. I don't have a big space. It's kind of contained. You can do it on your iPad as well, or your tablet if you have one. But yeah, I use it as part of my design process. It starts analog and then I go digital. So it's a nice combination to have those two things.
And I think I'm sure a lot of people have heard of Adobe because, of course, like PDF technology is all originally from them. But Adobe Illustrator is one common design tool, but there's also EQ8, which I'm sure people have heard of. Laurie, do you use that yourself for
Yeah, I do.
pattern
I'm
designing?
actually more of a newbie with it. I started using it the last couple of years, but definitely like being able to map it out in the software and then
Mm,
getting the actual fabric requirements instead of having to do math. It's just nice
right.
to have the software figure it for you. I do think like any technology, you know, there's pros and cons. So EQ is great, but I think anybody that can do something that's more of an app-based program, they would really corner the market. So I appreciate EQ, but sometimes I find it a little clunky.
I actually have a friend who is working on an app for quilt design at the moment, and I know that there are some basic ones out there as well. But Tony, you also do you specialize in EQ8 or do you teach EQ8? Because I think
I
you've got some
do.
slides, right, that we can
Yeah.
share.
I just
Um,
put a little bit of talk up there. So if you wanna, you can show
yeah,
them.
let me hang on. Let me get everything lined up and get this sharing.
But I will also say, just like Ali, I am in the process of learning Illustrator and design for my pattern writing element because that's really more somebody who's really savvy with computers to get into those two programs because they are very there's a
So
lot of variables that you can play with in it.
here we go.
Okay,
This is what I'm trying to do. There we are.
awesome. So yeah, EQ8's a program you can purchase it. You go electronicquilt.com. I am not affiliated with them. I'm not, I'm not going to get anything from it. I'm just saying I've used it since the. If you want to go ahead and move to the next slide, it has all my little
Yeah.
notes,
Hang on,
my
there we go.
story. I've been using it since 2000. So I'm
Mhm.
very proficient. I originally had it on 3-inch floppies. You remember back in the day when computer disks
I
were floppies?
do. I do. When I started my first job, we were all using floppy disks.
Think I had 3 floppies to make it run on my computer. So I have used it for a long time. I've watched them grow and make it more user friendly. There is still a learning curve because if you're not, and we're so used to our apps and our phone now, poking and moving things easier. There is a learning curve with EQA, but
Mm,
I've designed quilts, I design blocks, I design t-shirt quilts, I design paper piecing patterns, all within EQA structure. And I do teach it. I'm going to teach. I have a class coming up locally in my local quilt shop, and I also teach. I'll teach it virtually. Um,
mm.
so if you go to the next slide, this is
Yeah,
what I
you've got
try
the
to
pros and
do.
cons.
Yeah, I try to do this so because the first time people hear about EQA, the price point is like over $200. It used to be so much cheaper, but things happen.
Mm,
So the cost is so when you look at it, you need to think about it as an investment. Is this something that you do a lot of your quilt designs and you need something to help you advance that process? Then this is going to be a good investment. If not, I have another slide here in a second with some other options. Great thing about EQ8 can be used on Apple or Macs and Windows now. Before a long time, it couldn't. It could only be used on Windows, and they finally got that taken care of. You can adjust your own fabric swatches to be accurate in your quilt design. There's so much free help with a lot of things now. EQ Electric Quilt has a huge community, lots of free patterns to start with, and then there's other things to build on. There's a beginner workbook. So if you need to learn that one-on-one a little bit more, they do offer that. It's, yeah, I think it's like 35 bucks or something like that. Um, Endless creative possibilities, lots of ways to organize. So you can organize in folders that you want. And they do regularly do software updates. So those are the
mm.
pros. The cons are the cost. It is for computers. So that's a big one right now. Lori was talking about, they kind of limits you because you have to have a computer. You can't do it
Mm.
on your tablet when you're sitting on your couch. So keep that in mind. And there is a learning curve. So if you are more comfortable with computers and you're computer savvy, this is something you can do. But I'm around a lot of customers that's not their forte.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you just have to think about. So that's kind of what I wanted, just to share that information, kind of give a high level view of EQ8.
Yeah, and you've got these other
Oh
options
yeah,
here
next slide. Yeah.
as well. And in fact, someone in the chat had just asked whether anyone had used Canva or Procreate for quilt design. And in fact, it hadn't occurred to me to try and design something in Canva, which I do use a lot for social media and so on. But Procreate is the app on the tablets that Matt Barnes is using in his t-shirt workshop, and is also a popular choice for designers, but it wouldn't do any of the fabric calculation and so on. And I've heard of Pattern Jam and Pre-Quilt. I think Pre-Quilt is the one that I'm probably most familiar with, but I hadn't heard of these other two, Quiltography and Quilt Assistant. So thank you for sharing those. I need to take that off. Yes, the whole issue of design is fascinating, and I'm often hearing little bits and pieces from different people, bits of feedback about which programs they like and issues they have with them. Liz, what about you? How do you use technology in your quilting?
Okay, do you want to just put my deck on as well?
Yes, let's go back to it. Oh, hang on.
I'm coming from a slightly different angle. Obviously the quilt you can see behind me, that was actually done on a long arm with computerization. So we picked a design. The machine belongs to a friend of mine, and she let me do it. And because I had knowledge prior to, when I worked and had to know how to teach and sell the machines and the software, I could do it, but I don't own one. I don't have the space and I don't have the cash. Have you got my deck there?
I have. Here we go. Let's bring this up now and go into slideshow. Is this your first slide? I think it is.
Yes. So you can whip past that.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, you can whip past that as well. I long arming, you can see. Now, this is another option. And it may be sort of older technology now. However, I've still got it and it still works brilliantly. And Janome, I have a Janome previous top of the line machine, and this has it. Other brands, I am jolly sure, have this. Maybe not all, but quite a few of them have this, where you can hoop your quilt in a special hoop and then embroider. But in a sense, you are doing quilting on that quilt. So how it works is you've got a hoop that has a space for magnets, and then it has this hard template that you use to push the quilt down into the hoop. Next slide.
Sorry, I was fascinated. I was completely forgot what I was doing with the mouse.
That's okay. I have big magnets which then clamp the quilt on all four sides of the hoop. Next slide. There is my quilt. Now pretend that hasn't already been quilted. You can see the stippling there. So at this stage, this is where I would be to actually take the hard template out. Believe it or not, some people didn't remember to do that before they pushed the stop-start button. All right. Then the picture next to it on the right is showing it doesn't only do stippling. You can bring any quilting design in from, you can buy the quilting design, you can digitize it yourself. This happens to be one that is included in the technology of that particular machine and the system. And if somebody is interested, that hoop is called an AccuFill hoop. Some of you may have this hoop and you've just left it to one side because you don't know how to use it. Trust me, learn. It's really quite cool as an alternative to a computerized long arm. Next slide. There is that quilt in its entirety, and everything on this quilt was done with that hoop.
Wow.
So, you know, you might think that it's laborious because on a long arm, it's all there. When you're doing it with a hoop, you've got to keep hooping and unhooping. But once you've practiced at it, it's not all that bad. Next slide.
And does the stippling kind of match up with itself?
Yes. Because I didn't go into too much detail, but you print a paper template And then once you've quilted one piece, you can line it up with the template so that you cannot see where one hooping of stippling starts and where it ends. They all merge together.
And
So,
I guess you can probably do other designs as well.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So you can go past that. That just happened to be another one I did. This quilt, I picked up the top at a free table at a guild. And then when we got the AccuFill hoop, I quilted this, and it actually involved 35 hoopings. And that might make somebody stand back and say, no way, I'm not ever doing that. But each hooping was only 4 minutes. So I figured out that with hooping and unhooping, with my magnets, moving the quilt, starting in the middle and moving out to the four corners, as we always do with our quilting, I actually quilted that quicker than I could do it with a walking foot or free motion. So, you know, all I say is don't discount that and say, oh, I'm never doing that. A long arm's the only thing you can use. It's not. There are other ways of doing computerized quilting. Next slide. There's just another example. It was a long citrus table runner, and that is one of the blocks where I used some designs I brought in from elsewhere to quilt that block. Next slide.
Beautiful.
There's another block where I brought in some designs that lent themselves to triangles, and then I positioned them and quilted them, also in my embroidery machine hoop. Continue. Here is something that actually I entered into Quilt Canada last year, but it wasn't accepted. That actually is a queen-size bed. The photograph is a bit misleading, but the embroidery on that quilt was all done with my embroidery machine. The one on the right is applique in the hoop. So that's another way of doing applique. Next slide. Those panels down the side of the quilt were all done with a design in my embroidery machine. And I just did one hooping after another until I had completed the quilting in those sections. It's really a lot easier than it kind of looks. Next slide. I'm whizzing here because I know. Now here is another one that I did show yesterday, but you can see very clearly that part of the embroidery design is applique in the hoop, and part of it is quilting. So, you know, you can get it all done in one go. It's really quite impressive. Next one.
I remember you were talking about this yesterday. This is on satin, right? So
yes,
it was incredibly slippery.
Yes, and I ironed interfacing to the back of the satin.
Amazing.
And then obviously it also had batting. You work with it. This one didn't have batting. And it was my peacock quilt. And so your embroidery of the peacock, in a sense, becomes your quilting, but it's also an embroidery. And then my border around the side could have been with batting, but I chose not to because it was a wall hanging, and I figured the thinner it was, the better. Next slide. Okay, now this one is something slightly different. I also own a digital cutter. Many people will know about the Brother Scan and Cuts. Mine is a different brand, but it has software that enables me to make my own designs as an applique, and then cut out all those little purple pieces with the cutter, and then hoop up, and it stitches exactly around where I cut the fabric.
Oh, so it takes you through the whole process. That's
Correct.
interesting. Which brand is that does that?
It's no longer available, but it was called Artistic Edge Cutter. And it was sold by Janome. I found it wonderful. A lot of people thought it was much more difficult than the Brother Scan and Cut. I didn't ever own the Brother Scan and Cut, so I'm not going to down it or say anything about it. This one worked for me, and I've still got it, and I still use it. Okay,
beautiful.
Next slide. Okay, that's just where you can find me.
Wonderful.
Okay.
All right.
Anybody's got questions, they're welcome to ask.
And what about, has anyone else used these cutting machines? I know there's all sorts of ones like AccuQuilt and Cuttlebug and things like that. Has anyone else tried those? Silhouettes, right? Exactly.
Yes.
Laurie, you're nodding as well.
Yeah, I use a Cricut Maker. Um, and I've used it to cut applique pieces. You know, now I've been using it to do the heat transfer vinyl to put on labels or on the little quilts. And so, yeah, it's been a really fun tool. So,
Yeah. And Tony, what about you? Have you used other ones?
Well, the shop we sell AccuQuilt, but it's not technology, you know, it's just a
No.
die cutter. But I have a Cricut maker as well, and I've used that one for all
And
sorts of
Ali, what
stuff.
about you?
I don't use any cutting machines, but when I was studying design, we used, like a CNC router, which is the same type of a thing, right?
Oh,
You basically
yeah.
have an SVG file, which is your path, and instead of cutting, obviously you're sewing. So again, like coming back to Adobe Illustrator, the flexibility of the software there is that you can design anything that you want. You can draw whatever you want. You can export that as a path, which then you can, send to, I'm not a long arm quilter, but I'm imagining you can upload a file that you want to your software. And then that's the path that your stitching will follow, right? So I have students who create pantographs. They create those in Illustrator. Might maybe start in Procreate, and they bring them into Illustrator to finalize them. And then that's their digital asset that they're selling, are those pantographs for long arms as well. So the flexibility of learning the software that allows you to create any kind of design, motif, style that you want gives you a lot of flexibility to then be able to leverage all of these different technologies, whether they're embroidery machines, whether they're cutting machines, whether they're long arm machines. You can just kind of go crazy with your creativity. It's pretty exciting.
And is that in Illustrator that you would design those pantographs and so on?
Yeah, you design it in Illustrator. So you design the vector path. So Illustrator is a vector program. So basically it's like a mathematically determined path. And you can export that in lots of different formats. And one of the formats that you could export it as is an SVG file, I imagine, is what you would use with long arm machines. DXF, okay, so you can export a
DXF is what's
DXF as well.
accepted by all of the long arm quilting computer systems. Yep. But there are other tweaks. It's that it's not easy from Illustrator. Most people still need to wash it through Art and Stitch or AutoCAD.
Yes, I've got Art and Stitch. It's a good program.
Yeah, Art and Stitch, very expensive, and that will export in every format required for all the different computer systems, and take out the nodes that are needed to take out for some of the software, and add things for those that need extra information.
I don't think I've heard of Art and Stitch, so
it's
assuming there's at least one other person out there.
It's a couple in the Netherlands who have the program, and it's great because it's for people who do machine embroidery as well as long armers. And just to clarify, on those tulips you saw on the last slide, my software for the cutter will cut that fabric, but then I can also save the file as a stitch file, an applique stitch file. And then that's why I can do it in my embroidery machine on the exact same spot I've cut the fabric.
Extraordinary. So I imagine there's people, we've got all our attendees listening now, we've got people listening on Facebook, and other people will watch this video afterwards, but there's probably people who would love to start doing some of this stuff, but don't really know where to start. So I know we've talked about so many different tools and bits and pieces, but let's say that and I'm opening this up to anyone, but let's say that someone wants to introduce a more technical element into their quilting hobby. Where would be a good place to begin?
I think maybe
It's a too broad a question.
Yeah.
Maybe where they have a strong interest. I mean, if they're interested in quilting their own quilts, or if they're interested in embroidery or lettering, I'd kind of just start where they really are excited.
Right. Okay. So let's start where we started earlier with long arm machining, for example. I am the kind of person that's always thinking, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a long arm? And I don't have the space, no mind the money, or possibly not even the need for it, to be honest. But like, if someone is thinking about taking a first step to going beyond a domestic machine, I mean, what should they be thinking about? Because I know I've seen ones that are like on wheels somehow, where you're moving your domestic machine around with handles. And that seems like a kind of interim stage
Yes.
before going full long arm.
Yeah, look, there are a lot of frames out there where you can put your domestic machine onto a carriage, onto a table, and you can also purchase those tables to fit your space. Again, you can actually, so that your machine is moving over the quilt rather than the quilt moving under the needle, you can still get frames that are hooping your quilt. But then it stays stationary, and that is that middle level to step up to work out whether this is for you. It's a very expensive exercise if you're not sure that you're going to enjoy moving a machine over a quilt rather than the quilt under a needle. I always strongly recommend I mean, I've sold hundreds of machines now and computer systems on all brands of long arms. And that's why I started the show out here, the Australian Machine Quilting Festival, is so that you can go around and actually physically feel these machines and have a play on them, understand how they work with you, talk to the dealers, work out the different features and which ones you're more interested in. I had one at one point. I had this young lady who has got an illness that meant that she could not stand. So a machine that was able to be lowered and you could sit on a saddle stool or some sort of stool for her to be able to, and she needed the easy movement. Mine was the one that comes automatically with hydraulic legs, so you could lift it up and down, sit or stand or change the height at any time to relieve the different muscles that you're using. But those with handles that are fully flexible. But the mid-range they're not so much industrial machines. They really are a hobby machine that's been stretched, and they're great, and they're getting better and better and better as well. There is absolutely nothing wrong with those. If you're wanting to use them for a commercial business, I would, yeah, stretching. Yeah, consider. But at the moment, if you're really wanting to get out there into a commercial business, you haven't got the dollars, but you do have the space, look at the second-hand market. Those really, really good quality commercial machines, industrial machines, they won't die. 20 years though, some of the companies now, they're moving faster in upgrading with the electronics, but the mechanics are exactly the same. So a really good second-hand machine is going to get you into business. And a really good second-hand machine with an old stitch regulator that may not be as good as the current stitch regulators purely because technology has improved, you can go put a computer system on that and you're totally computerized. They don't need a stitch regulator. The IntelliQuilter does not need a stitch regulator on the machine. All it needs is a needle positioner so that the needle will stop either up or down. That's all it needs. And you don't need the stitch regulator. My very first machine had no stitch regulator. Didn't exist. I bought it secondhand before stitch regulators were introduced to the market. So we all think we have to have the biggest and the most latest, but there are a lot of people out there winning awards. Linda Taylor, who is the absolute queen original machine quilter that actually, I think she won the very first ribbon in Houston for her machine quilting on a non-stitch regulated machine, and actually introduced the quilting world to machine quilting. Prior to that, it was hand quilting or nothing. You remember the age-old argument on what's better and what's real? And then since computer systems and technology has come into play, we have the same argument on whether it's fair and whether it's real quilting.
Is it a cheat?
Right.
And is it? And in actual fact, it so is not. I can look at a show. I can tell you which is a good computerized quilted quilt and which is a bad one. It all comes down to the skill of the operator.
Absolutely.
Whether it's freehand or whether it's computer or whether it's hand quilted. I've seen some awfully hand quilted quilts,
That's true. That's true. I've made some
right?
awfully hand quilted quilts.
Yeah,
So.
ditto. So, it's not about how it's being quilted, it's about how well it's being quilted, no matter how you do it.
Mm. No, so that's the machine, the long arm side of things, and that is
Mm,
wonderful. Thank you, Tracy. There's been a lot of love
mm.
in the comments in the chat for your thoughts on that. What about like when it comes to design? If someone wants to get started designing their own quilts, what would be some good options for tools for them to get started beyond, assuming they've kind of gone through the pen and paper stage? What's the next step?
I use Illustrator on my iPad or on the computer. Procreate's another one, where you can have your shapes and join them together. I actually started out before EQ with a program called Quilt Pro, and I found that easier to use than EQ way back then, and did a lot on that. But I guess I've had Adobe for a long time now, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
you make it work. Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
not a lot of
true.
barrier to entry for Illustrator. I mean, yes, there's a
Yeah.
learning curve, but that's the same with any software or any
Yeah.
kind of new tool that you're going to use. There's always a learning curve.
Mm.
So just being aware of that and going into it with the mindset of, okay, well, I'm starting from zero and I'm going to feel like a bit of a weirdo here because I don't know how to click the mouse properly anymore. All of a sudden it's different in Illustrator, but just being okay with that and just getting started. Adobe has a free trial. You can just buy one of their software packages for a fairly reasonable price, and it's a monthly kind of an agreement as well. So you can figure that out. And really everything that I teach my students or tell my students when they're starting Illustrator with me is you have just got to get in there and try it. You've got to play
Mm.
around and figure it out. There's no other way to learn any software. I've learned many, many software programs, and the only way to do it is by doing it. Like you have to get in there and play and make mistakes and figure out how to delete them and make 10 new files because you can't figure out how to erase something from the first file. All of those kinds of mistakes, been there, everyone's been there. Just get in there and have a go. And, maybe even start with the tools that you've got. I think, Liz was talking about what are the tools that you already have available to you. Start with what you've already got. You don't have to rush out and spend money. You don't have to rush out and get whatever else. Just try and figure out, okay, what have I already used? Maybe you used a CAD program once upon a time and you have some kind of CAD knowledge. Go back there, check it out. I mean, whatever you've got already, start with what you've got.
Yep.
There
Adobe
is.
Fresco is the free one that I downloaded on
Yeah.
my iPad, and
Yeah.
I started playing with that long before I ever bought Procreate, which is very, very affordable anyway.
Yeah.
I think Procreate is something like $10, maybe $12, and it's a one-off cost as well on the tablet.
Yeah.
One of the things that I can't remember now whether it was Ali or Laurie mentioned it is that Illustrator will actually calculate the fabric usage for you, which I hadn't heard about. Or no, have I got that wrong?
It's EQ will do that. They have a print option and they'll figure out the yardage. So.
And one of the things, the criticisms I've heard of EQ is that sometimes it's a little bit off on the yardage. Is that fair to say? And so sometimes there's a little bit of maths still involved.
Yeah, I always add a little bit anyways.
Of course.
Because you never know about variables, and I like a little extra in my stash later.
Make a mistake.
Absolutely, a slip of the rotary cutter and it's all over. No, absolutely.
I feel like people have this fear of the calculating of fabric requirements. The way I think about it is, I mean, we're all pretty visual people, right? I actually use Illustrator. I design at scale, so I design one-to-one in Illustrator. And if you do that, then all your calculations are pretty much done for you. You can build all your blocks and then you just select everything and you can tell how big it is. I literally draw a piece of fabric in there, 42 inches wide by however many yards I want it to be. And then I can quickly place all of the pieces on it and calculate how much of the yardage that I need inside the program. So I do a kind of visual calculation method as opposed to like, okay, maths and how many pieces per width of fabric strip and all those kind of things. I do that as well. But you can use Illustrator if you work at a one-to-one scale to visually calculate all of your fabric requirements as well, which I find really intuitive as a visual person. And a lot of my students find it very intuitive like that too.
Whereas I'm a
Wonderful.
maths geek and I just use Google Sheets. I do everything on
There you go.
spreadsheets.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so I
Ah,
work out, well, how many, rectangles, how many squares,
Exactly.
and you can just get it to calculate how many you can cut out of a strip, and you can put the formulas in and it pops it all out.
I am struggling with this at the moment because I haven't learned how to use my EQA, and I've designed an English paper piecing pattern, which is all different. Well, there's only 3 different shapes, to be honest. I don't want to maximize my difficulty here, but working out the fabric requirements when practically everything I make is scrappy. It's, you can't just say to someone, if you're actually selling a pattern, you can't just say get a pile of scraps. You'll probably have enough, don't worry about it. So yeah, you need to be a bit more precise. What about on the machine embroidery side of things, Liz, which you took us through? Like, how would someone get started with that?
Okay. If you already have an embroidery machine and you want to get into using it to quilt your quilts, what I would suggest you do is either go to your brand dealer and have a chat with them, or you can go online and Google and go to Facebook and search for groups. There's a group for just about every single activity and like or dislike on the planet.
So true. You got to be careful sometimes.
And you will find some group that it will meet your needs and answer your questions. And I think, like what Tracy said, I don't think you should rush out and buy something super expensive. For example, I knew that I couldn't afford a long arm and I didn't have the space for it. So what did I do? I bought a sit-down quilter, but you're still moving the quilt as opposed to the machine moving. And so, you know what? It just didn't work for me. So I eventually sold it. I didn't lose too much money, but the point is, don't buy equipment that you may have sitting there gathering dust. Do your homework and ask a gazillion questions before you make up your mind.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice. And I've certainly been guilty of a couple of impulse purchases in the past. Lastly, just what about cutting machines that we've talked about? If someone wants to get started with one of those, what would people recommend?
I would recommend the same thing. Google it and get a bunch of names of digital cutters that, and research what each one's doing until you know what you're actually looking for, and then make your decision from there. And there are digital cutting groups on Facebook too.
Yes.
I have heard of at least one guild that had bought, I think it was AccuQuilt, and then people could cut pieces at guild meetings and use it as a guild resource.
Yeah, a lot of guilds
definitely has that.
Yeah, I'm not sure how AccuQuilt would feel about that, but whether it's
they know.
I'm sure they probably do, and I'm sure it leads to a lot of sales for them as well. But yeah, I think that's a great idea. Or if you know someone that's got a cry cut or something like that, then they could bring it to a meeting one time and have a go. Now, before we close out, is there anything we haven't touched on that really wanted to raise? Because I think we've covered a huge array of topics today, and so I don't think there's anything. Yeah,
I was going to say, did you want to show my slides that I put up?
Was it this first 2?
I think it's about 5, and it just shows when we're talking the long arm computer quilting, it's not just for edge to edge designs either. So
right,
it was how creative you can be.
And
I
see
also
them.
and it wasn't just for quilts either.
No, absolutely. Yes, some of this is amazing. Here we go. There we are.
So this very first one is actually my most recent class that I had on Machine Quilting Academy. And that the very body of the quilt is showing how I used an edge-to-edge design, but I placed it diagonally and how I could quilt that as you advance the quilt and match everything up.
That's an amazing quilting design.
Yep. So this is very heavily cut. This is entirely done with the IntelliQuilter on my long arm. And I use the tracing features to extend the piecing out into the borders. Place motifs, which most are commonly aware that you can easily place a motif in those borders. But then I actually digitized using the IntelliQuilter itself on my long arm, the background fill, and cut out all the pieces. So the background fill went behind the design. Now, it's actually not that tight when you see this up close. Melanie, who's just put a comment in. It is definitely a custom quilted quilt, but it's a reasonably, I would call it nearly a single bed size for that one. But it was just, so it's not heavily quilted. That background fill, you know, they're a good centimetre apart for those ones. So that is definitely all custom quilted using the computer, the tools that are on there, as well as digitizing that background fill, which is like a
I
watery
love
thing.
it. My eye keeps landing on different animals in the
Mhm.
Yes.
quilting. So it was lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're just all commercial patterns, all the different animals, but it was the background fill, the extension of the piecing, and being able to physically stitch a pantograph on the diagonal to suit that piecing to accentuate that. Next slide.
Mm.
Now, this is actually my youngest daughter. Another reason I could use it. She bought this dress to wear at a wedding, and she is quite well endowed.
Yeah, quite revealing.
And it was showing way too much. So this was our workaround because she ran out of time to go and find another dress. So that is organza, double layer organza, and it was a commercial pattern with a lot of editing to then be able to stitch on this double layer of organza to then insert into this dress to make it a little bit more modest.
Beautiful.
So,
It's come out wonderfully though. It's so
yeah,
lovely.
it did come out really nice, and there's no way she would have ever worn that dress if we weren't able to do that bodice inserted in there. So I'm just saying that there are other things that you can make, not just quilts, or using your long arm and your IntelliQuilter or computer system. So next slide. Now, I've also been
Sorry.
teaching,
There we go.
this is all design work using the IntelliQuilter. So it's just using basic curves and loops and to be able to build a design. So you can see I've built it all of these things on the IntelliQuilter screen itself, and then able to stitch it out. And that was what size was that one? About 45 inches square. So there was definitely done in sections as you advance the
Beautiful.
quilt, and it's very much possible. I still haven't coloured that quilt. I was planning to do it. But all of these, that's some of the features of this computer system, is to be able to build a design and cut out parts of it and place designs behind another and all that sort of thing. And it's actually fairly quick and easy. That's not a hard thing to learn. And I'm pretty confident you can certainly do this in Statler and Pro Stitcher as well without too much difficulty. Obviously, IntelliQuilter is the one that I use and love and understand and teach. So that was just some of the features to be more customized. This is the sort of stuff that I don't think I would bother drawing all this out on paper and then tracing it all onto fabric. So, and I've also done piecing and couching and all sorts using the computer system. So it's not just for an edge-to-edge design, though that is its primary purpose from a business point of view, because that's the cheapest form of quilting for the customer, but the most income producing form of quilting for a person in business is the edge-to-edge designs.
It's great that you mentioned that, because it's kind of easy to forget that you've got so many options on the machine. Well, look, we're at time. As Melanie Claire says, this has been extremely informative. So thank you very much. I just want very quickly, just a couple of minutes, just for people to know where to find you all. If they've been dazzled, as I have, by your knowledge. So we'll go in the opposite direction. Tony, Tracy, Ali, Laurie, Liz. So Tony, kick it off.
JustBTstudios.com is my webpage, but you can find me on Facebook and Instagram under the same name. Pretty easy.
And
to find.
you've got a QR code there for people to.
Yes, I do. That's my email.
Wonderful. And Tracy, what about you?
For the education side of things, it's machinequiltingacademy.com. I've also run a retail site since 2000, and that's constantinequilts.com. So that's where you'll find rulers and IntelliQuilter sales and lots of other machine quilting notions. But Machine Quilting Academy is the education site, both for IntelliQuilter and for freehand and business support.
Wonderful, thank you. And Ali is so technically gifted. She's been editing her banner in real time there to add her website address. Ali.
Well, we are on a technology call here, so why not use it? I'm
Yeah.
allyride.com, ALLYRYDE. It's up there on the screen. You can join my email list, check out what else I do, and I would love to chat with you. So thanks for tuning in. It's been really interesting hearing everybody's insights. Amazing.
Absolutely.
Mind blown.
Gosh, yeah. Yeah. Laurie, how about you?
Yeah, you can find me at my website at coloradothreadworks.com. I'm on Facebook under the same name, Instagram, and then YouTube. And then anybody who makes it to the mountains in Colorado, just come sew with me.
Oh, excellent. Standing invitation. Finally, Liz.
Yes, you can find me on my website, sewwithliz.com, and that has links to all of my social media. And I do also have a Facebook group. You're very welcome to ask me questions. And if anything today didn't make sense, speak up in the Quilt and Learn Facebook group, or
Absolutely.
reach out to me directly. Either way is fine.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. I have learned a huge amount today. I'm sure everyone else has. Thank you for your time and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right,
you.
bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.